Okay, Gus. Say hey. Gus said hey first. It's Alan and Gus again. I wanted to talk a minute about uh, false prophets and how easily they are to identify. First off, I don't say there's any right or wrong. There's definitely no right or wrong in anything in the world. There's light and darkness. That's the only two forces that there are. And if you go to prescribing good and bad and right and wrong to any of these things, that's immediately judging, and you can't. Well, you can never tell what anybody else is going through. There's light and dark, basically. So it helps if you're let's say, a child of the light, if you will, or on the side of the on the light side. Uh, if you hear some noises, Gus's belly's been bothering him today some, so just overlook that. Um, but yeah, how easy it is to spot. I mentioned in a video before, if you go to a lot of these churches, which I'm definitely not a preacher or I don't prescribe to any religion at all. I think that loving one another and is, if you actually do that, then I believe you shouldn't have any problems. Religion and different theological studies are very interesting. Moving along, but yeah, this the false prophet and how easy they are to spot and how upset they get when you point them out. Just the upsetness alone ought to er, uh, uh, give it away. But yeah, like I had mentioned in a video beforehand, you okay, guys? About yeah, like any preacher, the church or whatever. This the idea of church and religion has been so institutionalized with finances and self gain and the ego and what have you that it's just I like to say it makes my soul nauseous when if I looked into it too far, which I try to. But it's easy to tell, like anyone who's the leader of a church or the shepherd of a flock or what have you. If you speak with them a few minutes or just observe them or know what type of person they are, if they're unable to go into, as they say, the trenches, I guess that could be said, like to, go on to a job site where there's foul language being used and not turn around and snap at whoever's made the dirty joke or whatever and say, I'm a preacher and I won't listen to that and so and stuff like that, or if they or are they able to go to like a bar and sit and mingle with the people? How long could they do that? Or even go into a house where drugs being used? How long could they sit in any of these situations before their head explodes, wanting to tell everybody what they're doing wrong and how right that they are, and how they're just there to try to help them when that actually puts a wall up every time. I know from being on, I guess, either side spectrum, but that's one way it's easy to spot, and they Jesus hung out with sinners, and like I mentioned in a video before, if he was telling them constantly to watch their mouth and this and that, then he wouldn't have been hanging around them long. Certainly not long enough for people on the outside to call him one of them. He's like, "Who? Why are you hanging out with the sinners for?" He said, those who are sick don't need a physician, what have you. And I'm definitely not getting on the Bible preaching kick or nothing like that. Said I'm fascinated with everything. Um, but yeah, how to tell these false prophets. I was talking to a fella here a while back. Is a real late night theological discussion, I'd like to say, and I get the fellow worked up because he's the head pastor of this medium decent sized Baptist church down in Georgia, and I tell him things like, I like Buddhism and stuff, and boy, he just he just burns him up. But I don't subscribe to Buddhism or anything. I think it's simple, like Jesus said. I'm a big fan of the character of Jesus. If you love one another, then you have no need for any of the commandments, none of the laws, any of that stuff matter. If you actually love one another, you're never going to want to steal and covet. You're gonna appreciate things, and that's common sense. But anyways, yeah, I was talking to this guy, the big Baptist preacher dude, and he was telling me that someone had asked him once, what's the worst sin you've ever committed? And he said, well, that's easy. Not loving the Lord thy God with all my heart, which is one of the commandments, of course. He went on to tell the guy but that's something that we all do because we're not capable of not doing. So I'm looking at this guy who's telling me that I'm talking to the preacher, and he's telling me about an encounter he had with a fella who was obviously either trying to prod him, because he's this Baptist minister, he's telling everybody about it, and the guy's like, "What's the worst sin you've ever done?" And his answer is basically nothing. I've never sinned at all, because even if he's had this preacher man's probably about 45 or so that I'm talking about. Throughout his whole life, it's like what he's saying. The worst thing he's ever done is something that he can't have any that he hadn't have control over. Is he's saying he's never felt a twinge of jealousy. He's never had a little bit of lust. He's never envied in the least bit. When people give responses like that, it's back up and think about it. You've got a lost person saying, he's either prodding at you and you should be more clever than him and respond better, or he's actually wanting to see if you're human like he is too, trying to get some common ground. And dude just pulverizes it by saying, "No, I'm perfect." And this is the leader of a flock who, yeah, anyways, but yeah, they're easy to spot out. I think the biggest thing is how judgmental they are when around, if the false prophet, if God, the Creator, were to use a human form of someone who was gonna, save souls and get a real possibly say accurate read of the condition of mankind, he would, in my opinion, that it would be in the form of like the situation of an undercover boss. Like I had mentioned in a video before, if a head pastor or deacon starts work at a job, and on the very first day he tells everybody at lunch break, "Hey, I don't like cussing, I'm a preacher, this and that," or even if he takes a different approach, which I'm not saying all people are bad, there's good and bad everything, but even if he were to take a more civil approach and just go ahead and announce he's a preacher, of course, and being nice to everybody, that's one way too, but that still causes blockades because there's darkness out there. I think it'd be far better to mingle amongst the people and show that you are an equal and how that you live your life. And then if the opportunity arises, mention it or what have you. And they're the false prophets. It's if you or if any of these preachers that say phrases like this, "I fall short every day," or "I'm not perfect," or I sin all the time," or "I'm fall short of the glory of God," all these things that sound just lovely when they say it at church. If you sit them down at a table and say, "What do you mean by that? What do you do?" Is it, do you get road rage? Do you feel envy? How is it every day? And if they give you an excuse like, "Oh, well, it's something that I can't do nothing about," it's like, okay, so you're saying that you're perfect, and that's I don't think that's a good way to get through to quote unquote lost people when you run around throwing a brick wall up saying, "I'm right and you're wrong." A lot of bear with me. You all right, Gus? Okay, Gussie. Um, it's strange, like missionaries and what have you. I've dealt with the Mormons before, and they're a nice group of people, but they send these basically kids out and get started. Bear with me. How can I say? Uh they I got the Mormons visit me and Gus one time, and this ain't picking on them or anybody. It's the people whom again, some people do mean well. They're just maybe ignorant, don't know better. Some people, but once you bring it to light to them, like I mentioned a minute ago, if you sit them down at a table and talk, the first one of the two parties that becomes interrupty and frustrated, you can pretty much that that's the side of darkness or whatever, because anybody ought to be able to admit anything they do without giving a lengthy excuse for it or what have you, to because we're all the same, and this and that. And if these preachers actually believed in the heaven and hell that they speak of, I think they would be far more adamant. They'd be on the streets. They'd be doing a lot more. They would be they would be approaching lost souls in a much more clever human way than running around, even getting more louder, preaching on a street corner about how everybody's going to hell. And again, some people might mean well, but that's just off-putting. It's if the microphone was turned off, you can look and what somebody's saying is, "I know something you don't. I'm right and you're wrong." And then when they start, quoting the Bible and stuff, and I always get a kick out of that. And I love the Bible. It's a great book, but it's like, it's it's people weaponize it and use it too much. Just as short. People say, well, the Ten Commandments says to honor thy father, thy mother. I'll say, well, Jesus said, if you don't hate your father and mother and follow me, anything that anybody quotes from the Bible, there can be another quote you could follow up. The Bible says, they say, Bible says a lot of things. And anybody that singles out quotes to fit their personal narrative, again, I would consider a false prophet. And if they do that and don't realize it, you sit down and talk with them and they understand. It just depends on how somebody lives their life. I'm just carrying on for a minute. But there ought to be a much more clever, much more friendly, accepting human way. I've ran into or known people that that know of me, which I don't right now. There's nothing wrong with it, smoking pot. I think cannabis is wonderful, but I've heard, we'll call it church people, say, oh, but that, even if it helps, I've known of people that it's literally saved their lives, and I'm one of them, by the way, in different cases of how using it like medicinally or whatever. And you say that to a lot of these, I call them false prophets, and they'll say, well, that's okay, but it's still illegal. The same false prophets that'll run a stop sign and break the same law. But I say, what if a doctor prescribed it? And they'll say, oh, well, that's different there. I'll say, well, have you ever heard of OxyContin? Didn't doctors prescribe that? Didn't that, it's such a back and forth thing. But Gus, I'm jumping around. Sorry, but back to the if anybody quotes the Bible and says, well, the Bible says this and that, you can always come behind it. It says honor thy or father and mother, but I've never heard the line which comes right after that say that fathers don't provoke your sons to anger lest you discourage them. There's so many things that can, when people talk about tattoos and markings on the body, they say, well, the Bible says, not to get any tattoo. Well, the verse just above that mentions about not trimming the sides of your beards. And if somebody clean shaven says something about tattoos, it's like a game that needs to be more friendly, like gamesmanship, instead of these people. And if one of these preachers were to hear what I'm saying, they'd say, oh, well, that means something spiritual, and that means that. And it's like, okay, so who's the final arbiter of that? So you're telling me it's a fluid type thing? It's they're easy to spot out, and they used to be annoying and get on my nerves. I'd like to talk about it more because there's said, I'm not saying there aren't good people in large Baptist associations and churches and this and that mean well. I think that's a good thing to get together in one accord and friendly and everything. But it's been taken over by the dark side too much, because if you were to grab one of these guys by the collar in the middle of their sermon and jerk them out of there and put them in a tough situation, to see how they act, which is not, it's impossible to do, or see how they react and see how they accept others. I guess I'm just talking common sense, but it's easy to spot these guys out because they'll run straight to their Bible and make quotes, and not to poke back at them, but at the same time to poke back a little, and they're with another quote from the Bible. You know how many times the Bible says, Bible says. The Bible says a lot of things, and when anybody starts saying, "Well, the Bible says this and that," there's a very good chance that they're weaponizing it. They're saying, "Well, the Bible says this and that," and the this and that they say is on the side of them being right and you being wrong. And remember, there's no right or wrong, because when you do right or wrong, you're judging. And there's only light and dark, and there must be good and bad. It's like, I told the dude I was talking to, I get him all tore up when I talk about Buddhists. Boy, he'll about interrupt me, say, Buddhists say all this is an illusion. Is this an illusion? It's funny. Watch him get worked up. It's so easy to get the false prophet worked up when you start talking about these things, and how that they grasp their belief and don't kind of open their mind to different concepts and stuff. It's funny. I lost where I was at. Sorry. But yeah, it's yeah. There has to be light and dark. If you tell these people, like, that without Judas, If Judas hadn't betrayed Jesus, then we wouldn't have this cross that you preach about every Sunday. You could blame it all or give Judas all the credit, because again, it's you have to have one without the other. And I don't want anybody to mistake me for saying right or wrong. I'm just talking about things that I think funny and I don't hear pointed out often enough with these high and mighty preachers that, like the missionaries that go into I'll bother the Mormons for a minute. They're a nice group of people, but we had them visit me and Gus here a while back. We were not in a tent; we was in a tool shed actually, and a worse situation than we're at now. I didn't even have any shoes at the time, but they would come and visit. I called them to get a Book of Mormon for something to read and to try to just get some company for a few minutes, and sit back and see, because I'm not confused about nothing, man, and not saying I'm right or wrong, but these people that have boxed in beliefs and prescribed religious stuff or whatever, I get a kick out of. And there are people in the different groups like this that mean well or whatever, but missionaries and are the same as Mormons. When they come into a place where I'm living with my dog in a tool shed and I don't even have any shoes, I'm still cheerful. I'm not complaining. I actually asked them for Lysol one time because I had no money, no way of making any money, and they just kind of all stiff in their short sleeves and their ties, like, well, we're just missionaries. We're not supposed to, it's like, you're not supposed to what, and they always hang out for a short amount of time and they might stop by. And I don't want to pick on them again. They're nice people. Most of them are like kids that know nothing. It's just such an odd contrast because I could see in the situation who was hung up, and it was the missionaries. Um, they've got these nice. Their hair was marvelously done and the nicest shoes and vehicles, and they were nice and clean. And here I am, I think at the time again, didn't have shoes at all, barefoot, and just having a difficult time with life. But still, I've been through a lot of situations, and this was not the worst situation I've ever been in, so I was doing okay. But it is just a strange contrast. I'm like, you're coming to try to help me, so I said, I'll go to church with you or to their temple. Now, this has happened with a couple of different religions, not just the Mormons. Said the only thing is, if you're worried, want me to come to church, that's the only way. You can't talk about human stuff. You got to go here real quick. Can you come to church? Can you come to church? I need to bring my dog. Where he's not allowed, I won't go, and that's the bottom line. If my soul's that important, then they'll be able to. As nice as they're dressed and as nice as their temple is, I'm sure they've got one member that has a pickup truck that can take me and get week after week come by, and they just couldn't get it figured out, man. They just, well, I don't know, and I couldn't get their bishop to come and visit me or nothing. I was wanting to talk to him. Give me excuses. And there was another, a lady invited me to a non-denominational church. I was like, yeah, I would love to go. She seen me out back from where I was staying at reading my Bible. I was like, yeah. I said, the only thing is bring Gus. He's the only family I've got, the only physical being in this world that I can trust. And I've got many, and that's just how it is. But I would love to go. And she went and talked to her preacher and come back. It's like, yeah, well, I can give you a ride, but it's a no on the dog. I can't remember if it had something to do with they had gotten new floors in the church. Some people have said, well, what if he bites somebody? And these are all legitimate excuses, but just the lack of trying to figure out a way to accommodate us. And if I were more hung up and actually looking for something in these churches other than just camaraderie and to get a kick out of it, then I would be offended. If I were offendable, be upset. Like, I'm trying to go to church, and this is the only thing that I've got in my life that matters to me at all is my dog, and y'all can't figure it out. And another guy mentioned about going to church. I know, Gus. Um, and I was like, yeah. He said, I'll be there. You just let me know. I'll be there Sunday at this and that time. And I was like, all right, well, if Gus can go, I've even offered these people, I'll sit outside near a window or something, and they just like, I don't know. He don't want to get dog hair in his car, don't want to do this and that, and these are just church members. But if they go and talk to their pastor and come and then message me, no, it don't look like it, and their pastor who's supposed to be the leading the flock, saving these souls, and this and that. If I were a pastor, or if someone weren't a false prophet and they heard of someone who's, all these people knew that I was homeless and in very dire straits at the time, and heard about that, like the bishop would have left the 99 and came to check on the one. None of the higher ups, none of the deacons ever come. They just sent their messenger back like, "No, we'll see if we can get a kennel here, and it's going to be a couple of weeks." And and all these people are, I mean, very nice vehicles and houses. And it just, if I were offendable, it would hurt my feelings. I'd be like, we can't even go to church. But it's just, well, I didn't expect to meet as much resistance as we did. I will say we were led into church one time this last Christmas service, on a service like on Christmas Eve or something like that, and that happened to be the church down in Georgia of the fellow that I was mentioning, who was telling me about someone asking him what's the worst sin he ever done, and his answer was basically nothing. I'm perfect. It's anyways. I could go on and on. 20 minutes, but I just wanted to talk about that for a few minutes, and be nice to one another, everybody, please. Okay. Say bye, Gus. There you go, Gussie.